There are two layers to the markings on the walls in this area. The square and dot patterns, that are the functional elements of the environmental puzzle, and the mural representing the Vortigaunt's interpretation of the events of the Half-Life saga. For the first few years of development, this area only contained the dot patterns supporting the perspective puzzle, but as we fleshed out the rest of the level, we found that playtesters responded especially positively to the Vortigaunt's wall markings leading up to the hideout. It was at this point that we realized that this area could serve as a canvas for our Vortigaunt's artistic magnum opus. To do this, we organized the dot patterns into a sort of swirling starfield behind the Vortigaunt's art. The imagery itself, which was inspired by petroglyphs and other traditional rock art, portrays many significant events from the Combine invasion, painted hurriedly by the injured Vortigaunt, almost as if he was trying to capture what fleeting memories he still had of the vortessence from which he had been severed. The fact that Vortigaunts have a complicated relationship with time gave us a lot of leeway in terms of drawing this as a strict, linear timeline. For example, you may notice that the Vortigaunt uses contemporary Combine troops as shorthand for Combine invasions from the past, or that the timeline is just generally hazy. A little from the past, little from the present, and a little looking forward to the future events of Half-Life 2.
There are many musical themes and motifs used throughout the game to represent unspoken aspects of the story and lore. For example, the Vortigaunts play an integral role in the subplot of the game, and we chose to use music to subconsciously communicate the repeating nature of their role both in the timeline of Half-Life Alyx and in the larger timeline of the Half-Life saga. Within the music in this scene, you'll hear variations of themes used throughout the timeline of the game, from the very first sounds of the game up to the finale in the vault. Variations of these motifs represent the imprisoned chanting of the Vortigaunts, the extraction of their energy to confine the G-Man, as well as historically familiar sounds representing the vortessence itself.
You all right? What's wrong?
I'm fine, Russell. What's up?
I'm losing your signal. Alyx? Alyx? Can you still hear me?
Oh, this is weird.
During our earliest attempts to raid Alyx, our instinct was to have her react to absolutely everything. But what we learned from playtesting was that Alyx reacting too much could actually be off-putting. Say a player's in a really tense, zombie-filled level, and they're having a great time, but suddenly Alyx is in their head, sounding angry, or frightened, or anxious. These Alyx reactions were creating a disconnect between how the player was feeling and how the character they were role-playing as was feeling. So we took a lot of those out. The Alyx reactions we left in tended to be the ones that were practically universal. Alyx's reaction here to the surreal entrance to the Vort hideout is a good example, where it was just so different from everything the player had seen up until then, and kind of takes you by surprise. We watched so many playtests where the player would see it and say, "Whoa, that's weird." So we had Alyx say the same thing a second later, almost like an echo.
Oh.
The Alyx fans. You received my messages.
I did?
Come. Enter.
Okay. Thanks.
You are welcome.
So, what's a Vortigaunt doing here?
Cooking.
Right, but I mean, in general.
I have a brain injury.
Oh, I'm sorry to...
My brain is injured.
That's terrible, and I hope... Look, I'm actually pretty busy looking for my father. Eli Vance.
Vance. Yes.
The Combine have him, and I really do need to get moving.
The Combine. Yes. Do not go yet. I must show you something.
Look, I appreciate...
This way.
I can't stick around.
It is important.
I know, I'm sure it is.
The Alyx Vance must go this way, anyway.
Okay.
Oh.
For as long as we've been making choreographed scenes like this one, we've found that there are two types of players. Those who become engrossed with the characters, and those who tinker with everything around them, paying little attention to the scene's action. To make these environments entertaining for the tinkerers, we usually add objects for them to find and play with. Since this scene is split into 2 rooms, we were able to add a large number of interactions to this first room for players to discover after the Vortigaunt has moved to the second room. Some interactive objects are pure physically driven toys, like the dangling headcrab corpses and the hanging pans. Others are animations triggered by the player's actions, like the way the caged headcrabs react to the player approaching or shooting them. One type of object on the table is a squeezable headcrab heart, which is a remnant from an older version of this scene where the player would revive a wounded Vortigaunt by squeezing nectar from these hearts. While that scene didn't work out, we found the experience too compelling and, well, too gross to completely cut from the game.
Come in.
The fundamental challenge of any choreographed dramatic scene like this one is making sure that we entertain the player without undermining the delivery of critical gameplay information. In this case, the player needed to leave this scene with the knowledge that the Vortigaunts have been imprisoned and that the player should seek the Northern Star. This particular scene went through many different variations during development, from a cooking scene with an extremely traumatized Vortigaunt to this humorous version. We even experimented with an interaction where the player was required to squeeze the nectar of several headcrab hearts into the Vortigaunt's mouth to revive him. While this was a memorable and novel VR interaction that ensured the player was engaged with the scene, the interactivity on the player's part often resulted in playtesters remembering the actions they took, but not the critical gameplay information. Eventually, we ended up with this more humorous scene, which struck an effective balance between entertainment and goal delivery. Importantly, we also distributed the scene across 2 separate rooms, breaking the information delivery into 2 steps. The first room where the player meets and learns about the state of the Vortigaunt, and the second room where the player is given their new goal. Separating these physically into rooms seemed to help players more reliably retain the critical information delivered in the second room. While this scene did undergo a lot of changes, one story beat remained virtually unchanged from the very first roughed-in version. The moment the Vortigaunt tosses a headcrab carcass down to the player and yells, "Sustenance!" right from the start, this moment always got a great reaction from playtesters and remained all the way to the final product.
Sustenance!
I'll eat it later. Thanks for the help.
You will be welcome.